Welcome, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Kamil, and I'm the programs manager here at the Asian American Writers Workshop. For 30 years, the workshop has empowered and amplified the voices of Asian American writers, as I'm sure you know. They've done this from a position of radical or an ethos of radical inclusivity. Now, I know that sounds like a very airy, ephemeral thing to say, but what that means is expanding the definition of what it means to be a writer and an Asian American. And as a Palestinian who was accepted here 5 years ago, I can tell you that's more than just talk. And in a country that rarely feels like home, this space definitely does. Just a couple of housekeeping remarks. Masks are required. If you don't have one, we got a bowl, a really nice looking bowl over there with like 3 different colored masks, you know, so you can make your pick. There are 2 gender neutral bathrooms. We have one over there and then one through the kitchen. So if you need to get there, just go there. And then the way that it'll work is we're going to go for about an hour, and then there will be a Q&A. And please help yourselves to any beverages or snacks in the back. With that being said, I will pass it on to our moderator. Yes.
Nice to meet you. If you have trouble hearing me really fast, let me know. I'm Fan, and so happy to be here. I'm co-chairing the Kundiman Northeast chapter with Kathy Chow, who's sitting back here. First, I just wanted to thank everyone at AAWW, including Devin and Mohammed and all their team, and also the team at Kundiman as well for supporting our Gina and Shirley and the entire team. So thank you so much. So without further ado, first I'll introduce who do we have first? Hannah Bae. To start off. So Hannah was one of my first writing instructors at Kundiman, and I'm just so glad that she's here. Hannah Bae is a Korean-American freelance journalist, nonfiction writer, and illustrator who is at work on a memoir about what it takes to build a beautiful adult life after healing from childhood trauma. She is a 2024 grantee in literature for the New York State Council on the Arts, a 2024 juror in nonfiction for the Kirkus Prize, a 2021 and 2022 Peter Taylor Fellow for the Kenyon Review Writers Workshops, and the 2020 nonfiction winner of the Rona Jaffe Foundation Writers Award. You can find her work in anthologies such as Our Red Book by Simon & Schuster and Don't Call Me Crazy, Algonquin, and online at Asian American Writers Workshops, the Margins, Catapult, the Washington Post, the San Francisco Chronicle, and other outlets. Welcome, Hannah.
Thank you so much to Twee and Kathy and to the amazing team at the Writers Workshop, Devin, Sophia, Mohammed. I love this place so much. I could not agree more that this place feels like home. So I am grateful to be back. I'm going to read an excerpt of my memoir in progress. I think this is the first time that I've read this part to an audience, which is really exciting. So thank you for being here. This is about the sport of crew or rowing, and I was a coxswain, which is a role that you'll learn more about. So this is a piece called Find Your Point. Find your point. My freshman year of high school, when I was just starting out as a novice coxswain, this was the first bit of instruction I ever got, taught to me by an intimidating upperclassman rower who sat facing me from stroke seat. My point, this big blonde white girl told me, was where I wanted the boat to go. My job as the coxswain was not only to yell, but also to steer. I had to picture my point in my mind. Eventually, the upperclassman assured me, I'd have the curves of the shoreline memorized. One day, I'd just be able to know where my point was, no matter where I was on the water. I would learn that, in truth, when you are seated lower in the boat than all of the rowers and you have 8 heads and torsos directly in your line of sight, you are driving blind. The best course of action is to trust that the finish line lays directly ahead of you and to proceed full steam ahead. But a river lined with trees is unpredictable, ever changing. Every day brings different conditions, new hazards lurking ahead, countless dangers just below the surface of the water. And rowing shells are notoriously unwieldy. No boat can stop on a dime, and hairpin turns are impossible when a boat is so long, pushed by oars that stretch so wide. The best way to turn a boat is through a coxswain's incremental touches on the rudder, which can only happen when you anticipate your movements way in advance. No matter how well you've locked onto your point, it's easy for your best laid plans to go awry. Finding your point and following it is an act of faith. This applies both within the context of crew and outside the realm of sports altogether. In the classrooms at my high school, I started foundering almost immediately my freshman year. It was laughably easy for me to lose sight of my point, at least in the academic sense. The current of learning moved much faster than it had in my middle school, and I paddled furiously to try and keep up. Swiftly, I found that I had little aptitude for geometry and biology. In computer science, late in the afternoon, the dark classroom and the hazy humming light of the overhead projector lulled me to sleep. Many weeks later, I realized some of my drowsiness stemmed from not being able to see the computer code projected on the screen before the class. By the time I was fitted with my first pair of glasses, I was already woefully behind. But in the coxswain seat, I was shocked to find that I could excel. In my life on land, at home and at school, so much remained out of control. For the first time in my life, I was struggling to pull in the excellent grades that had always felt like a given, and I didn't know why. I didn't understand how my academic struggles could be a result of what ailed my family and home life, problems that I didn't yet have the words to explain to anyone, not even myself. Child abuse, mental illness, institutionalization, family separation, domestic violence, poverty, neglect, anger management problems. I excised all of these words from my vocabulary when I was at school. But on the water, I could be in charge within the narrow confines of the boat. I had a language for control. I could narrate to my crew what was happening around us and what our plan would be. I could be strong in the boat. The boat gave me comfort. Sometimes my confidence blinded me to how little I truly knew of what lay ahead. Driving blind brought disaster to my family between my sophomore and junior years of high school. I wasn't in the car. I'd stayed at home with my father. Behind the wheel was my older sister, a teenager with just 3 years of driving experience. Black asphalt, slick with rain that fell in blurry cellophane sheets, obscured the road ahead. Unfamiliar Pittsburgh highway. The burgundy Dodge Caravan, a miraculous raffle win from the Korean grocery store Hannah Bae. Asleep in the minivan's 3rd row seat, all the way in the back, body sprawled flat on the spongy fabric bench. She was the only one not wearing a seatbelt, of course, because how can you sleep in the back of a van with a seatbelt on? My little sister somewhere in the car. My big sister didn't see the car stopped ahead of her until it was too late. By the time her headlights caught the jeweled facets of unlit ruby and amber plastic, and on the other car, it was too close for her to stop on wet road. Her foot slammed on the brake, but our family's minivan careened into the other car's back bumper. Their brake lights were out. She couldn't see the other car was stopped ahead. On impact, the airbag exploded, muffling my sister's view from the driver's seat. The seatbelt, jerked tight by the force, caught my younger sister's body. Both sisters were safe, unscathed. My mother, though, Her soft body, it rolled unprotected, uncaught off the fabric bench, a crunch of bones, of metal, unprotected maternal flesh bashed and bruised and broken. My mother lived, although I question how much of the following years could truly be called living. I never saw a photo of the old minivan post-accident, but I imagined crumpled steel, scuffed and chipped paint, the wine color of a bruise, a total loss. Thank you, everyone.
So next up, we have Jen Liu. Jen Liu is a former center. Jen Liu is a former Center for Fiction, Susan Kamil Emerging Writers Fellow, and a 2021 NYSCA/NYFA fiction finalist. She is the recipient of fellowships and residencies from Asian American Writers Workshop, Kundiman, VONA Voices, Tin House, Jerome Foundation, and Kimmel Harding Nelson Center, among others. She works for the Moth, a storytelling nonprofit, and serves on the advisory committee for Film Forum in New York City. Welcome, Jen.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I was a fellow here from 2018 to 19, so it's really nice to be back in the space and to see everyone. And thank you. I echo Hannah's words. Thank you to Kundiman and AAWW for organizing this for us. So I'm going to be reading from a new short story. The context for the short story, it's called Suzuki Method, and it's for anybody who was ever forced to play violin at a very young age. I myself played violin from the time I was 4.5 until 14. I gritted my teeth through all of it. And the premise for this story is a group of teenage girls, 17, who are counselors at a summer violin camp. And a prodigy comes to town who kind of disrupts their whole ecosystem. So the section I'm going to read is in the voice of the protagonist, who's actually one of the counselors. And she is reflecting on her own history with violence. By the time I came to teach at Summer Strings, I'd had my share of humiliations at the hands of my craft. I started practicing when I was 4 years old, marking finger positions on my bow with corn cushions and working my way through Suzuki's practice books with the help of my mother's constant attention. My teachers complimented my ear for pitch and my technical affinity for the craft, but I lacked the vitality to make a movement really sing. My whole life, I was second violin, listening to recordings of Midori in the car while my mother cried tears of rapture. At 14, I was one of 3 soloists chosen to perform in front of a visiting maestro, a male violinist from Beijing. Usually, my mother accompanied me to my weekly violin lessons, sitting in the back of the room as I worked through Rachmaninoff and Tchaikovsky. But the performance was on a Sunday, and my mom was at work, sweeping hair at the local salon, so my father drove me to the music school instead. I was so nervous beforehand that I trembled in my seat, and once I was on stage, I could feel every mistake I made in my memorization. Afterwards, the maestro from Beijing walked into the spotlight in his crisp white shirt and press pants. He gave me a thorough dressing down. Do you realize that your face conveys every single mistake you make so that your audience can see it? He asked me. It is obvious what you are doing on stage. Please make it enjoyable, if not for yourself, then at least for others. To my embarrassment, I burst into tears right in front of him, watched by my father, my violin teacher, and an auditorium full of students and parents. I sobbed my way through the rest of his notes, and when he was done, I stalked out of the theater and back into the rehearsal room to put my instrument away. I loved all the accoutrements of my craft. The box of rosin we rubbed on horsehair bows, the violin cases like tiny, elegant coffins lined in felt, with Velcro straps to keep our instruments safe. My bow had a tiny butterfly inset that made me feel happy when I looked at it. My violin teacher, an Argentinian named Bruno, who was sweet and jovial, found me in the rehearsal room and gave me a warm hug. "I'm so sorry," he said as I pressed my face against his chest. "I can't believe him. I never should have put you up there. It's like he's never talked to a child before in his life." Tears blurred my eyes as I packed up my things. It was one of the rare moments I'd ever seen an adult express sympathy towards something I was experiencing. My father was waiting for me outside with a look of concern on his face, but no tenderness to Bridget. "What happened to you up there?" he asked when we were seated safely in his car. "Why did you let him talk to you that way?" "Where were you?" I felt like yelling back at him. "Who is my protector?" Instead, I stared in silence as we drove through the city and back towards our house, where I knew my second punishment was waiting. When we got home, my father retreated to his study, and I hid upstairs in my bedroom until my mother came home. I could hear her footsteps as she walked up the stairs and stood outside my bedroom door thinking. "Jillian," she asked, "can I come in?" She pushed the door open. When she wasn't accompanying me to my music lessons, my mom spent her evenings washing hair and sweeping floors at a local hair salon. Her moods came on slowly, like the crescendo of an orchestra piece, until they overshadowed the quiet phrases that came before and after. She stood in front of me while I stared down at the slippers on her feet. The toes were molded into the shape of Wild E. Coyote. "What happened to you today?" she asked. Her tone started soft and pliant like an adagio. "Ba told me, why did you play so poorly in front of all those people?" I stared down at the ground in front of me and shook my head. "Was it because you didn't practice hard enough?" she asked. "No," I whispered. "It's not their fault." She stood staring at me. I felt her grip underneath my armpits as I stumbled to my feet. "Listen to me," she said as we stood face to face. Her hands were small objects, coarse but useful. She tried to get me to look at her by taking my chin in her hand. "Why have we been paying all this money," she said, "for you to waste it like this?" Her voice was pitching forward, a tempo shift. "Tell me, are you good at anything? How am I supposed to call you my daughter? Can't you do anything right?" I scrunched my face and closed my eyes, waiting for the slap that never came. In truth, my mother could get me to obey without ever touching me.
Thank you, Jen. Okay, next we have Gina. Gina Chung is a Korean American writer from New Jersey, currently living in New York City. She is the author of the short story collection Green Frog and the novel Sea Change, which was longlisted for the Center for Fiction First Novel Prize, a 2023 VNN Discover Pick, and a New York Times Most Anticipated Book. A recipient of the Pushcart Prize, she is a 2021 to 2022 Center for Fiction Susan Kamil Emerging Writer Fellow and holds an MFA in fiction from the New School. Welcome, Gina.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much to the workshop, the amazing programs team, Devin, Mohammed, Sophia, for having us. And thank you so much, Kathy and Tweet, for gathering us here. Oh my God, both of those readings, so good. Also, I used to drive a minivan in high school and had a fender bender in it, and then also played not violin, but flute for a very long time and hated every moment of it. So a lot of trauma coming back. No, it's, I mean, it was beautiful. Thank you. This is a safe space. Yeah, this is a workshop. We're here. We're gonna have a good time. So I'm gonna read to you all a little piece, a short excerpt from my new collection, Green Frog. Also, just a very quick little shout out. I made merch for my book because this is a thing that I'd always wanted to do. So there are little green hats in the back along with the Venmo code if you would like to, absolutely no pressure. But the title of this collection is called Green Frog because it's a reference to a Korean folktale about a green frog, the name of which is Cheonggeguri, for those who may have heard of this fable. It's a sort of cautionary story about getting kids to listen to you, and parental trauma, which are some themes that come up in the collection. But so yeah, that's just there if you're interested. I'm gonna read from a different piece of the collection. And it's the first story, and it's called How to Eat Your Own Heart. And it's a recipe for doing that. Step 1. Draw the water into a stainless steel or copper pot. What it's made of isn't that important. What is important is that the pot be made of material that you can dimly catch your own reflection in, the faintest outline of your face peering back up at you before the small blue flames on your stovetop warm the water into motion. But resist the urge to look closely, to trade your pot for a mirror, as that is not what you are here to do. Step 2. Add sea salt, more than you think you will need. Scatter the crystals into your hand and throw them into the water as though they are rice and you are the only guest at the world's smallest and saddest wedding. Stir until the salt dissolves, becoming a ghostly veil. Repeat until the water tastes like the sea, so salty it burns the inside of your mouth, scrapes your throat, makes your taste buds shrivel. Avoid watching the pot, because waiting for the expected to happen is energy you no longer need to expend. Walk away if you must. Step 3. Once the water comes to a rolling boil, lean over the pot and feel its hot steam kiss your face. Whisper to it the names of your mother, your aunts, your grandmother, until it knows everything that you know, steeped in the women who have come before you, who taught you this recipe and have perfected it over the years to ease their own heartaches, through wars and ghosts and children born dead, and faithless husbands and family members never seen again. If you don't know your grandmother's name, don't call your mother to ask. Instead, remember that being allowed to know the first names of your elders is a luxury. Speaking them aloud, even if to yourself, is a small heresy. Step 4. Your knife should already be sharpened. If it isn't, hone the blade against a stone, the edge of a plate, a nail file. Remember that a dull knife is more dangerous than a sharp one. A sharp knife is biddable, easy to wield, but a dull one can turn on its master as quickly as a starving dog. You'll know you're done when the blade whistles through the air. Do not hold it like you are afraid, or it will dance out of your hands and cut your fingers to ribbons until red curls over your scarred wooden cutting board, staining everything. Step 5. Chop scallions, ginger, and garlic into half moons, crescents, slivers. Allow any stray pieces to fall from your cutting board and onto the floor. Lick the sticky acidity of the garlic off the blade of your knife and let it bloom in your mouth like an earthy flower until the metallic taste of your own fear is gone. Step 6. Cut an onion in half. Remove the root and its papery jacket and the translucent layer inside. Bury the root in a plot of earth or keep it in the back of your freezer for stock, because what can be used again should be saved, as your grandmother once told you. Cut each hemisphere of the onion into 3 parts, using one hand to steady it and the other to slice. If your eye is smart, angle your tears into the pot, making the brine of your body useful for once. Step 7. Aim the knife at yourself, your breastbone. Slowly, carefully, use the tip of the blade to trace a large circle around your nipple, cutting through the fat and tissue until your flesh opens like a door. From there, it will be easy to pull your heart out of its socket. Remember all the times you would have eagerly traded away this small, aching bundle of valves and ventricles for nothing more than a look, a promise, the touch of a hand. Be glad that no one ever took you up on your offer. Hinge your chest closed again. Sew up the wound with kitchen twine or one of your own hairs. A safety pin held in place and attached to the fabric of your shirt or apron will do in a pinch. Note, you may feel a small jolt once your heart has exited your body, but pay it no mind. Remind it that you've been through worse.
Like the time a boyfriend left you on a crowded train in another country during an argument, or the time a dining chair in your childhood home sailed across the room to strike the wall behind your mother, propelled by your father in one of his rages. A blade parting the surface of your skin is nothing, nothing. Step 8, plunge your heart into the boiling water the way you would a lobster. But there is no danger of your heart trying to escape, to scrabble at the sides of the pot in a desperate bid for freedom. Your heart is no crustacean, no hardy beast reared and shaped on the ocean floors over years of evolution. It is tender, foolish, easily shocked into submission. After 5 minutes, remove it from the water and plunge it into an ice bath. Stroke its rounded shape with one finger like it is a spooked fish or a bird that refuses to fly until its wild beating stills. Step 9, heat a pan with a thin, neutral oil such as canola, sunflower, or grapeseed. But if you only have year-old olive oil from the back of the grocery store, that will do. Throw in the scallion, garlic, and ginger slivers and watch as they meet, negotiate with one another, alchemize. When the garlic begins to brown, add your heart to the mixture. Toss in your onion slices and allow them to caramelize, the salt and water of their membranes turning into something sweet. Set a lid on top and wait. Thank you.
So next we have Rajat. So Rajat Singh is a writer living in Brooklyn, where he is at work on a novel. His work appears in The Margins, The Believer, Story Quarterly, Lapham's Quarterly, Lit Hub, Catapult, Electric Literature, and elsewhere. He is the editor of MEFO, a collection of writing by queer South Asian artists, forthcoming in 2024. His writing has been supported by the Asian American Writers Workshop, where he was a 2022 Margins Fellow, as well as by Malay Arts, the Spruceton Inn Residency, the Tin House Summer Workshop, and Lambda Literary. Welcome, Raja.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much to the programming staff and to my fellow readers here. I'm really just in awe of everything that I've already heard, and I'm just grateful to be part of this extraordinary evening. So without further ado, I'm going to read something that I wrote years back when I was starting out in my writing career, in spirit of tonight's theme. So I'll start. There's nothing you need to know. It's an essay that ran in Catapult. Okay. At the end of a humid, wearisome summer, I arrived at the apartment my grandparents shared just as cars were flicking their headlights on and the humidity of the day was melting. I visited them countless times before, but this time felt strange, different, as if I had something to prove. I told myself my stay would be temporary. After graduating college in 2008, fashion's bright lights beckoned me toward New York, but I didn't know how to make a career out of my yearning for having beautiful things, or for having a hand beautifying other men. I felt too powerless to retreat from my desires, yet too emboldened to refuse myself. When I decided that my best option was to take an unpaid internship at a fashion magazine, my mother called her parents in Flushing to ask whether I could live with them. I wasn't aware of the details of the arrangement, and I preferred not to know whether any money was exchanged. Either this made me ungrateful or polite for taking me out of it, but I told myself I wouldn't be a burden. I unpacked a few of my best clothes in the bedroom Nana had vacated for me at the back of the apartment. Without any discussion, he decided he'd sleep on the divan in the living room, his move soundless. Only later did I realize I had displaced him. As I lay atop sheets that didn't smell like anything I knew, a bus sighed beyond the window. I opened Grindr bathing myself in the soft glow of compliments and come-ons. And I bared to the mile-long radius of unseen men, but I kept silent from my family. As the sun dipped one evening, fall slipping toward something cooler, I imagined in my mind how the apartment whose windows I saw from the street had already darkened. Either Nana or I would return home first, and one of us would see Nani sitting in a chair at the dining table, the room having been left to dim once the aide had departed for the day. Nana liked that. The fact that Nani wasn't languishing in her own bedroom. At the table, her head would be bowed, I think, her elbows resting on her knees, back hunched forward. I wondered how she spent her time alone, what whispers or murmuring she heard on the air. Perhaps some hours she lay in her bed, focusing on the single bulb on the ceiling above her. One of her eyes was cloudy from glaucoma induced by diabetes. Perhaps her ears sensed the comings and goings of men she could only trace out in the evening's faint light. I ascended the 2 flights before turning the key in the door, and I anticipated the moment I'd throw on all the lights, scattering bugs across the kitchen countertops. I thought ahead to the moment I'd glimpse Nana's ankles, swollen from hours of walking his measured, determined steps, the ones that carried him forward with a dignity not even a double replacement surgery could take away. He spoke of New York only affectionately as, quote, a poor man's city, his knees stiff from hours of pacing the concrete pavements. I myself was tired from running garment samples around the city as an intern, but I imagined the shame of feeling exhaustion in the face of how unforgiving New York was to an old man. Still, Nana pressed on, assisting travelers and families with securing visas to the subcontinent, like some quiet go-between, guaranteeing safe passage. And I felt soothed at the thought that I'd see him at the apartment very soon. And I chuckled to myself as I remembered telling my mother over the phone some weeks ago that Nani wasn't afraid to violate the rules of a government agency, that despite strict orders from the nursing agency to prepare only simple meals, Nani always wrangled her aide into making a lunch or dinner of lentils and rice, along with a vegetable like spiced cauliflower or green beans slick with oil and turmeric. But to my shock, I entered the apartment to find Nani standing over the stove, her body bent over the heat, the cloth of her nightie hanging too close to the open flames, licking the air. Although her fingertips were delicate in their searching for roti and the edges of the cast iron tawa, I banished any trust in my mind that she was able to care for me. It turned out she strong-armed the aide that day into kneading and rolling the dough with her. A film of flour covered the clear vinyl sheet that protected the dining table. Odd and misshapen rotis stacked in a pile on the counter. I dropped my bag to the floor and vowed from that day to call for boarding the train from the city. Nana yelled when he came home, citing Nani's nickname for her in quick bursts. Joke, joke. He stood over her and checked her blood sugar with a prick that no longer hurt her, only me, while she sat in a chair, gazed to the floor, scolded for her willfulness. She kept silent, stroked her eyebrows in concentration, wiped her face with a crumpled tissue that she kept in the front pocket of the nightie my mother had stitched for her. Rajat was hungry, Nani responded after a long pause. Her sugar, 256, and Nana noted this in the leather-bound journal he kept, writing and underlining, hi. He wanted roti. Hours later, as if on cue, Nani asked whether I drank my glass of milk. I didn't need roti. I didn't need milk. I never asked for anything. But her request was so small and her givingness greater than what I thought I could show her of myself. For I refused her each night, some nights opening the fridge and pretending to pour some, other nights lying and saying I'd already had a class. I couldn't stomach it before bed. I wasn't a farmer from her birthplace. Partition evokes a centuries-long mood called birha, the longing for union with the divine or the desire to reunite with a loved one. In the folk tradition of Punjab, the ferryman, Ladan, carries the distraught and lovesick Ranja cast out of his home across the deep, dangerous river Chenab. Ranja has to meet his darling here, who belongs to a rival clan. Ranja plays the sweet song of birha on his flute and moves Ladan, entranced, to take pity on him. But not before Ladan questions and contests him on his intentions. Quote, "It is best that those in trouble should die. They are happy who do not quit their homes," says Ladan. Ranja would have crossed the Chenab to reach here with or without his boatman. For the 2 years I lived with my grandparents, my bedroom had a slight gap in the brick exterior wall where an old AC unit hung defunct. A stream of winter slipped in as the radiator hissed and clanged, and I lay awake that night, wondering whether I knew what I needed. Thank you.
Great. Thank you all for sharing your work. It's such a treat to hear your writing through your voices and just to be in your presence. All right, so now we'll have a pretty free-flowing, informal conversation. I'll just kick it off with a question. We're hoping to focus the conversation around hearing about your writing lives, your experience with publishing, and any advice that you'd give to fellow emerging writers at any stage in their career and any other topics that you would want to cover. So first question that I always like to ask is, can you talk about why you write and when did you know that this was the path that you wanted to pursue? Anyone can start.
I can start. Yeah, I think I knew I wanted to write from like a very young age. I got like weirdly obsessed with like at the Diary of Anne Frank at an age where I was probably too young to like fully understand the context of everything. But I had like a little like a abridged version of it. And I think one of the reasons I was so touched by her story was just how honest she was. Like there's a lot in there about like hating her mom, like fights that she had with her sister. And the fact that she was so young when she wrote it, I think really impressed me too at a very young age to know that someone could write something, you know, just for themselves really, and then have this huge impact. And so I always grew up reading and writing, but then I kind of left it for a while. And it wasn't actually until I was an intern actually at the Asian American Writers Workshop that I started to think about not just being around books and writers, but also potentially even writing my own book someday. It took a lot of courage for me to come into that. And I think the reason I write is to sort of remind that sort of the younger, more like kind of sad, scared, but still kind of inspired version of myself that I am possible and that we are all possible. You know, I think anytime you write anything, even if it's the most private, you know, journal thing ever that you'll never share with anyone, you're writing yourself, I think, into the world, no matter what genre it is also. So I think for me, writing, you know, I love to complain about writing like a lot of writers also, but it's still a beautiful thing and a very brave thing to do, I think, to put a piece of yourself into the world in some way. I love that so much, Gina. I know that you have an intern here. Wow, amazing. So you're also coming home today.
It's like, yeah.
Oh, so I was one of those kids who kept a journal, and so your story of reading the Diary of Anne Frank reminded me of that. And I still have my childhood journals, which has been really helpful to me as I work on my memoir. And I think that I was always trying on different voices and trying to narrate my life to myself. And when I was studying creative writing in college, I could only take fiction classes because that's all that they had. It was poetry or fiction at the time. And I remember I would just write very thinly veiled versions of nonfiction. And just rename the character Liz. My best friend is named Liz. I think his real name is Liz. And I remember hearing from my classmates that it was unbelievable, that these stories were unbelievable. But I wanted to say that this is my life, but I couldn't because it was fiction. And I also just didn't know any better, you know? So I think that as I worked in journalism over the years, I think I grew up a lot and then finally was able to start articulating things in a way that I felt like I could offer a reader. And it was only really after like working like more than 10 years in a newsroom that that I felt like I could come to creative nonfiction and have something worth sharing with readers. So it took me a long time, but I'm really grateful to have the space to keep growing and yeah, to share these things that I think are real life that maybe some people don't understand, but I think a lot of people do.
Yeah, that, I mean, everything that everyone has said really resonates with me. I think childhood is a very lonely thing, actually, and we don't talk about that as much as we should. But to me, reading and writing as a child was a way for me to understand my parents and people around me who were incredibly confusing, I think, as somebody who, you know, was born here, had immigrant parents, had to code switch between school and, you know, trying to understand parents who didn't necessarily, you know, explicate what their childhoods were like and not having any other family members. So I actually think that the first love is always reading, and reading was a way for me to understand characters, which was a way for me to understand humans. And so reading was something that I was, you know, you've seen me like at a party, like look in the corner. So reading, you know, reading is the first love, and it's because children are fucking lonely. And if you don't have, you know, if you're not playing with your friends in the neighborhood, then you're reading these characters who are your friends and who become your friends. The thing that led me to want to write myself was probably the fact that, like, shout out to elementary and middle school teachers, because my essays and the things that I would write for class, it was the only thing that I got attention for as a kid that felt truly organic to me. You know, I think that as Asian American writers, you know, we get attention, but as Asian Americans in general, we get attention for a lot of different reasons. Sometimes it's positive and sometimes it feels negative. But I received a lot of compliments on my writing from like mentor figures, and it was definitely something that when they told me that, I was like, oh, I actually feel like you are touching on something that is organically me, outside of even just being Chinese American or being a woman or being, you know, XYZ, which are all important to me. But so that encouragement actually, I do remember as a kid, did you guys have like DARE at your school? Okay, so I wrote an essay for DARE, in which I literally said stuff like capiche, like I was like pretending to be like an Italian mom, and I won the contest, and I won like a DARE lion, and that was also a huge moment for me, to know that I could impersonate like an Italian mob boss as a fourth grader and win a lion. So all of those things.
I love hearing all these stories. I apologize, my mask strap is like broke, so thank you very much. I'm actually use my mom. So I actually didn't come to writing until I was about 30, and by that time it felt like, and it's a good thing that I've been invited to speak on an emerging panels workshop panel, because we often talk about emerging writers as these sort of people that are plucked out of like quote unquote youth, right? Wherein like they're discovered at this like in this embryonic state, and I was, right, these like gems in nature. And I think it's really interesting that you know, I decided at 30 that writing was going to save me from some of the paths that had sort of proven themselves just unpursuable by that time in my life. I'd taken a couple of different career turns, and some of those doors had closed and the paths felt like they were narrowing in, and I felt like I was actually, to be honest, and I still kind of feel this way, I felt like I was running out of time to make a decision. And I said that, oh, writing is going to be the thing. Unfortunately for me, I didn't realize that I also had like past demons, because when I hitched myself to writing, I didn't actually like I didn't even like think to open up the closet of my past and realize that like in lashing myself to an identity as an artist, as a writer, I was actually not really giving myself the space to fail. And I said it had to be this or nothing. And I kind of invented a story for myself that I think the people around me kind of implicitly knew, but were too kind to tell me at the time, that I was putting a ton of pressure on. I'm putting a lot of pressure on myself. And so I'm answering the question from the reverse, because I actually don't know that this is the path for me. And I'm sort of waking up to the fact that like, I'm okay saying that and acknowledging that like, this may not be it, but right now I have the rare privilege to be able to try it out. And I don't take that privilege lightly. I'm just sort of saying like, okay, Rajat, you decided at one point that like this had to be it, and it was all or nothing, and I was making myself miserable because I actually forgot about those earlier years that you guys all talk about when you were reading and writing as children, and I had that too, but I sort of conveniently forgot amongst the sort of the recognition and the sort of the extrinsic rewards that come with a literary career, that like the reason someone gets into it is for those moments of inspiration, those moments of feeling seen, the moments in which your younger self no longer has to feel lonely. And remembering that, and remembering that like writing is an act of love, and it's a gift that I can give to people. And it's a place where I go to find pleasure and to give pleasure, has renewed to a certain degree some of my attempts to feel confident about pursuing this path. My long-winded, circuitous, you joined me for about 8 years of that. So in my answer, so thank you.
That's so great. I really resonate with your story, Rajat. I also started pretty late, I guess, through the pandemic a few years ago. And I like really went in deep. But I also journaled a lot as a kid, and I totally forgot about that and the joy that came with it. So I love hearing your different paths and stories. And I guess maybe the next question, and as we talk, feel free to also pose your own questions at any point. I'm just curious, like when the writing gets really tough, or like you feel all this external pressure to like have these credentials or whatever and be published, like how do you deal with that? How do you handle it? How do you keep going to keep doing your work and you know, spark joy within yourself and for your readers?
You can start.
Okay.
So I felt like the pandemic was the early dark years, darkest years, because we're still in it. I really felt like in 2020 that maybe I was never going to write again. Like I had, you know, Mohammed and I were in the same fellow class at Asian American Writers Workshop from late 2018 through summer of 2019. And in 2020, I was like, yeah, I feel really fired up. I'm ready to go. And I got this amazing award from the Rona Jaffe Foundation. And then when I got the news, I was like, oh no, they picked the wrong person, because I don't know if I can write. Like, I really like, I was still in touch with our mentor and editor, Noel. And, you know, he basically like said we could write about whatever we wanted in terms of covering like what was happening in New York City around us. And I remember I did interviews with people, but I just like could not write. And I really was like, the muse left me. Like, I don't know if I can write journalism again. I don't know if I can write marketing copy again. I don't know if I can write anything creative ever again. But I just took the pressure way off. So Rajat, what you were saying really hits me, because I realized that I was trying to write all these horribly painful things. And what I eventually found myself going toward was writing about things that I really loved. So I wrote about crew. And then I was like, wait, I think this is a major thread in my memoir. And a lot of my friends who have read early versions or early drafts, they're like, wait, you're writing about crew? Because that wasn't present in like what I was writing in 2016 and 2017. But I think that sometimes chasing joy really leads you to interesting new directions. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like I was trying to think of a response to this question, and I've been asked this question before, and I usually say something like along the lines of like rest and self-care and prioritizing those things is sort of how I deal with it. And I think that's definitely still true. I think those are two things that are extremely important. And you know, I don't mean self-care, of course, in the abstract. Self-care can look like a lot of different things, including doing things that might feel really hard, but in the long run might be worth it, such as leaving a bad situation, quitting a toxic job, or, you know, ending a relationship that's not working for you anymore. These are all things that are energy drains on us. And I'm a very woo-woo person, so I think creativity comes from energy that you can create within yourself, that's also created from other things. But I was thinking about what you said about writing towards joy and sort of taking the pressure off of things, about writing in general. I think we often forget as writers that writing is the career parts, the accolades and publications, that's all great. And it all helps to sort of enable to sustain a life in writing, but it's not the reason we do it. And I do think that like, even if everything I ever wanted for my writing career came true, I would still be like, you know, self-doubting and miserable and like, you know, thinking I can't write if I'm having a rough time. I think the thing we often need to come back to is the fact that writing is play at the end of the day. And that doesn't mean that it's not serious. It's very serious, but so is play. You know, like we all remember being kids and like, you know, you can just conjure up the most ridiculous, fantastical scenario. And that feels so serious. It's like, oh, the floor is lava. If your friend falls on that floor, they're gone. You know, that's how writing feels. And I think that's like, and in order to sort of recover that sense of play, I sometimes will do like, I'll just try writing in like a really ridiculous font that I would never do. And that helps so much to take the pressure off of things. It also helps with like, if I'm writing something that's fiction, I realize I started doing this where I'll just write like a sex scene or like a cooking scene, like something where the character is receiving a lot of kind of very physical sensory pleasure in that moment. Not that all those scenes have to, you know, just be about pleasure, but I think that there is something about grounding yourself in the body of a character that can also be really grounding for you as a writer to remember like, oh, I'm here to describe something and to create an experience on the page, not just for whoever might read this, but also for myself.
I mean, I think what you guys have said is just really inspiring. I'm gonna remember this because I often forget in my like most self-loathing, like most, you know, self-doubting moments, like that these resources exist and they're available to me. So let me just like stop fighting myself and just stop and just do the thing. Just like give yourself permission to just do something else. One of the things that I really love to do is just like remembering that I can be with people again. And so one of my childhood coping mechanisms was to just self-exile. I don't know if this is at all familiar to any of you, but like that was my MO, and I think writing has all too. I hate to be like the downer here, but like writing has like recreated that environment for me, and I think I recreated it too in an active way. Like I just like retreated, and I'm really good at retreating, perhaps too good. And so just remember to like be around people and to reach out to people about like things that have nothing to do with writing. Just like take a step away and just like go to an art museum. Just like do something else. Play with your dog. Be with the people that are going to be with you even after your book doesn't doesn't make waves, right? Just remember that like, at a certain point, like that's kind of really what matters. Not to be like kumbaya about it, but yeah. That's what I think. That's what I
I don't really have much to add on top of that. I'm in agreement that for me, if I feel stuck or discouraged, my good friend Claire is here, and I think if it were not for community and constantly being able to text someone and be like, I've been rejected from McDowell again. You know, and having the support of people who know how it feels like that, just knowing that it's tough for everybody in different ways, and no matter how shiny somebody's career looks, you have no idea what they have had to battle to get there, or what their career will look like in 5 years. So I think, you know, comparison, as they say, is the thief of joy. And I think that writing, the task of writing and the way that the infrastructure is set up, asks you to compare yourself to a lot of other people. So, community for sure. And then also, like Rajat said, like going back to the other artists and things that inspire you, because you're not only in conversation with people, but you're in conversation with other people's work. And I find that whenever I'm feeling super discouraged, if I can watch a film or go to a museum show or read somebody else's book, even if I hate it, hate reading is also really inspiring. It depends on, you know, the jealousy. I think jealousy can be fueled, can fuel you in a good way, as long as the jealousy doesn't discourage you, but maybe lights a fire under your ass, which I think sometimes it can do. I feel jealous all the time. Yeah, for sure. A core emotion. But yeah, being able to talk to others and being able to converse with other people's work, privately.
Okay, thinking about maybe your writing practice, your daily lives as writers, okay, maybe a couple questions, like reality versus expectations for those who might be at the beginning stages of their writing journey, like when you kind of pictured yourself as the writer, growing up, like what, like, is your lived reality now sort of aligning with that? And how are you sort of prioritizing your time and energy now as writers? And you all have such busy lives and doing other things too. So how are you sort of balancing that and sort of living up to your dream of being a writer?
Just this week, I went to the second book launch for Sejal Shah's new fiction collection, which is called How to Make Your Mother Cry. And yeah, I feel like Sejal is a writer's writer, and she's somebody who has taken her time and put in a lot of work over the years to get to this place where she's putting out her second book into the world. And her first book came out in 2020, and it was one of those ones that I found that I just fell in love with. It's an essay collection. This is one way to dance. And I think I see Sejal's example and just see the craft and the artistry in her words and the sense of experimentation, especially in this new fiction collection. So I'm just like, oh, there are so many ways that you can do this. And it's very inspiring to me. And I think just being able to appreciate the love of the writing and the language just makes me feel like I can take pressure off myself and just take as much time as I need. And one thing I would really recommend to this audience, if you are an emerging writer, apply to lots of grants, because I feel like grants have kept me going. I think that sometimes when people enter into the marketplace, like if you have a book deal and you have to deliver a book, sometimes the advances are not as big as you would like. And I feel like I've gotten so many good, solid grants over the years that it's like the equivalent of an advance without the actual pressure of a publishing contract. So I've just been using that to keep me going. And yeah, I just feel like I can take the time that I need to write the book that I want. And, you know, I have another career as a journalist and freelance writer to sustain me. So I feel really, really privileged to do that.
Yeah, on the question about like reality versus expectations, I literally remember as a kid, I was like picturing what I thought like the life of a writer would be. And I thought I was gonna be some, you know, Stephen King type, you know, in flannel, in cabin all alone, banging out stuff. I mean, I don't know what his life was like, but that's what I found. But it was like always this image of me alone, like a sort of lone wolf like writer. Maybe that was because a lot of the writers that I knew about were these men who kind of had this, like these white men, like they just have this sort of legend about them of being, you know, like Hemingway, like this rugged macho solo person. They write about people like that. And now when I think about it, I'm like, oh, I would never get anything done if I were to live a life like that. I'm someone who really needs like community, which is something that Jen brought up earlier. I need to sort of like feed off of the energy that is around me, and especially in a place like New York, which can be very distracting, but I remember one thing I was like complaining about with my writer friends during the earlier part of the pandemic was that I'm such a nosy person. And I was like, oh, I don't get my fill of gossip and eavesdropping anymore. And I actually find it really inspiring. Like, not that I would ever put someone's like story in my fiction, but I find just hearing other people's voices really, really helpful. So, you know, that's one thing, is to just note that, you know, whatever you might imagine about being a writer, like, you know, bring in people into your life, be part of communities, go to events like at the Asian American Writers Workshop, like go to events in your community, go to a bookstore that you love and see what events they're doing. I think just being able to be in community with writers has been so life-changing for me. And has reminded me like why I not only want to write, but I want to make a living among other writers. And I think the other thing I'll mention is that, like, in terms of day-to-day writing, I have a day job like a lot of writers in New York City. And I once saw this tweet that like ruined my day, because it was like, do you ever write an email that's so good that you'll never make it in the arts? And I was like, oh my God, like all the beautiful, beautiful emails I've ever written. Like, that energy is just going into the ether. But you know, I do think that like sometimes with having a day job and with writing, I have friends who also work in jobs that have nothing to do with their writing careers. And so you just have to find what works for you. I happen to work for a literary nonprofit that, you know, is very much all about supporting the life of writers. And it's like a wonderful, great privilege to be able to do that. But at the same time, like, I have to be boundaried about my energies as well, and make sure that at the end of the day, I also have enough time and energy on my plate to devote to whatever it is I'm working on at the time. So those are some of the things that I would recommend.
I reach for the mic, but I have no thoughts. I actually don't have, I didn't really go in with like expectations, because when I was young, I don't feel like I had a ton of like examples of writers within the South Asian community. This is like before some of the, you know, the greats came out, and or they had come out and I just wasn't reading them. And I just didn't have those examples. And so like the idea of what my aspirations or what my expectations of that life looked like were largely beyond the pale to a certain extent. And I think what I'm realizing now, as I'm like, you know, late 30s, I'm sort of realizing that there is no one way to do this. And I think the beauty of being a writer is actually you bring your whole self to the act of writing in such a way that my imagination continues to fail me. And to have to lean on that. There's a quote, I forget if it's Neruda or if it's someone who he says like, forgive me if I ever invent anything. I'm hesitant to draw too heavily on imagination, because the incredulity of it, like the unbelievability of what kind of comes out of the machine that is my brain, just confounds me sometimes. And I'm just like, but what if I drew from real life? And so when you bring your whole self to the page, all the other experiences and the other past selves that you rejected, the people that you could have been, but didn't really explore. That's what I mean when I say like those that full self. And I think that reality that emerges on the page is much more interesting, because I mean, at the end of the day, you need stuff to draw on too. Let's be honest. You can't just like, I find that when I invent it from thin air, it falls flat. And that's yeah, so do other things is what I'm saying. Like, don't I'm not saying like don't be a writer, run from it, but bring all the other weird things that you are and who you are, and bring that with you to the page. Like if it's gossip and eavesdropping, or you know, things that you just don't think would have a place on a page, that's exactly the impulse that you should lean really heavily into. Yeah.
That idea of the things that you think don't belong on the page, like as I was writing in recent years, I was like, oh, like writing about nice things that had happened to me, like things that I feel gratitude and support from. And I asked people in a writing class that I was in, I was like, do you think this has a place in the manuscript? And they were like, oh my God, yes, you need these, because you can't just write like trauma. You need these buoying moments that give the reader hope. And I feel like that's what I'm more connected with in my daily life now, is the sense of gratitude for the people who I feel saved my life in so many ways, and made me feel held and loved. So they have a place, and I just didn't know. I thought like writing needed tension and conflict, but I'm like, oh, but you can't have just all that all the time. So yeah, it's just really interesting, like as you go through the journey of actually writing, like what emerges and what surprises you, and good things come out.
We have time for one more question.
Okay, maybe a last question. Well, I'll pass the mic to any of you if you have a question that you wanted to ask your fellow writers.
Is that the last question?
It could be, yeah. Well, to me, I want to hear your response too, but what was the last like amazing work of art in any medium that you really loved and felt like made an impact on you? Any medium. It doesn't have to be the very last one, but it could be a recent one.
I can answer this. I watch movies all the time. I think if I wasn't a writer, I would just be watching films constantly. So I just saw this film that I recommend that everyone see, which is The Beast by Bertrand Bonello. He's a French director, and it's got Léa Seydoux in it. And I saw it a couple weeks ago with my friend Chelsea, who's here. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it was the first film of his that I'd seen, and it plays around a lot with framing and craft. I mean, I think it's ostensibly about a love story in 3 time periods, which is something that I think Aronofsky tried to do but failed in The Fountain. That movie sucks so hard. It's so bad. And I'm grateful that Rachel Weisz is no longer with him. But so The Beast is The Fountain, but good. And it's based on a Henry James novella, which is quite odd. I think he took a lot of liberties with it, but it's Léa Seydoux and George Mackay, and you see them in the early 1900s in France, you see them in 2014 in LA, and you see them in the future.
And I think, I don't really know where I'm going with this. It's an excellent film, and,
What did you love about it?
I think it's experimental, but it also is rooted in the emotions that two people feel when they're falling in love. So the Beast, I think, in Henry James's novella, refers to this unnamed fear. And I think throughout the film, you're kind of trying to figure out, what is it that these two characters, what is the unnamed fear that they keep like ambulating around? And I think by the end of the film, you come to realize that, and I should say that this love story, it's always missed connections. It's like either Léa Seydoux can't go all the way, or George McKay can't go all the way, in these different time frames. And I think inevitably, at the end of the film, you're left with the understanding that the thing that exists between the two of them is this fundamental fear of love, like what it means like to actually commit to the act of falling in love. But the film really buries the lead, and I think it's also a film about film, you know, because in the very beginning, you kind of see, you see Léa Seydoux in front of a green screen, and an unnamed person is basically directing her to act as though she's afraid of something. And I think in that setup, you just kind of get the sense that, yeah, I don't know where I'm going with it. It's very good. You guys should all see it. I love films. I mean, I could listen to you talk about film all day, and that was, and Jen is like my like, we like see movies together sometimes, and it's always great, yeah. I was trying to think of the last movie I saw also, but then I realized the last movie I saw was The Mummy, and it was not. It's The Mummy.
Which one?
The very first one, which I had somehow never seen, but Rachel
Weisz.
yeah. She's very charming in it. I think that I haven't finished it yet, but it is the last thing that I think I read for pleasure before coming here tonight. I'm in the middle of, oh my God, it's called Our Share of Night by Mariana Enriquez. Oh, I see some bigness nodding in the audience. Okay, if you know, you know. She is so amazing. She's an Argentinian writer who a lot of her books have been published in English, and this I think translated in English, and this is her, I think, her first novel. It's like a 500-page tome. I'm like carrying this thing with me everywhere, like a baby. But it's really good. It's like a horror novel that sort of spans multiple timelines, but all kind of coalesces around the dictatorship in Argentina. So it's quite political, but there's also the horror is overtly supernatural, which I always love. I'm more of a supernatural horror person. But it centers around this family, this very evil, very like, you know, very powerful family that uses sort of the political abuses of the dictatorship to sort of cover up their own evil actions that are in service of this like unknown, very powerful God that they worship. And you're not really sure why that they do. And then you realize, and this is not a spoiler, that at first I was like, oh, what are they getting from this God? And then I realized that the pursuit of this God and the power is the thing that they get. So it's this really interesting analogy about power and the things that like keep it going. So yeah, I would recommend that one. So I recently went to the Printed Matter New York Art Book Fair in New York, and I had told a friend, like, don't let me buy anything else. And then I came across this amazing photo book. It's called My Motherland by the Korean photographer Ju Myung-duk. And it's from a press called Datz Press, D-A-T-Z, and it's really hard to find in the US. And I was like, I need this $70 art book of Korean photographs. But it's photos from like Korea in the 1960s through the 2000s. And it's a time when I never visited Korea, or like really even, I wasn't alive, you know? So it's just so amazing to see these photos, and they're really beautifully composed. And if anyone wants to look at my art book, you can come over and see it.
Sure. Well, I guess the first thing that came to mind, I haven't had a lot of time to read for pleasure lately, but the last book that I had time to pick up and read was The Night Parade by Jamie McNamara. It's so good. A friend had gifted it to me because I'm also writing a memoir, and I'm playing a lot with form and structure, and I was really kind of down and not feeling very creative or inspired, and just reading her work. So she uses Japanese and Okinawan and Taiwanese folklore and fairy tales, and tells her story without putting her in each chapter. It's like focus on a different Taylor story. And I just thought it was just so inspiring and amazing the way she's able to have a language and metaphor, and the structure and form was just very innovative. I love this. And I'm just recommending it to everyone. So everyone should take it. Okay, well, I think we're gonna close the conversation, but I wanted to thank all of you for sharing your experience.